Scientists measured how galaxies move, thousands of galaxies, and what they saw made them genuinely hope they had made a mistake somewhere. They ran all the calculations again. The result didn't change. Out there, somewhere, there is something. Something we physically cannot see, because it is hidden far beyond the edge of the observable cosmos. And that hidden mass is pulling our entire galaxy toward itself, right now, at a speed of hundreds of kilometers per second. That fact alone would be enough. But this is far from the main problem. Every single equation we use for launching satellites, for controlling nuclear reactors, for understanding why matter holds together at all, was written on the basis of one fundamental rule, on the belief that the universe is the same in every direction. 6 independent research missions, different teams of scientists, different decades, and they all arrived at the same conclusion. It is not. What happens to the laws of physics when the cosmos they were written for turns out to be something else entirely? This is no longer a philosophical question. The answer to it is absolutely material, and the mechanism is already in motion. Because to understand our connection to the universe, you don't need to look through a telescope. Did you know that when you simply wave your hand, you are literally pushing the entire universe? And this is not some beautiful philosophical metaphor. This is a proven physical fact. Look, here is the point. Let's rewind to 1883. There was a physicist named Ernst Mach. He decided to dig into a mystery that Isaac Newton had left unanswered 2 centuries earlier. The mystery of an ordinary bucket of water spinning on a rope. When the bucket spins up, the water inside climbs up the walls. Newton said, "Well, that is because the water is moving." And Mach asked a brilliant question. Moving relative to what? Relative to the tree outside the window? Relative to the Earth? No. The water is moving relative to every star and every galaxy in our cosmos, simultaneously. And this is where things get truly interesting. Mach realized, if the universe were completely empty, if you removed all the stars and planets, the water in the bucket would remain perfectly flat, no matter how hard you spun it. It would have nothing to compare itself against. And this means something crazy. Your inertia, that feeling of being pressed into your seat when a car accelerates, is not the weight of your body or air resistance. It is an invisible connection to the entire cosmos. Every galaxy, every star, and every particle of matter in the universe is pressing back against you simultaneously. Everything, all at once. But here a problem emerges. What if all that mass around us is distributed unevenly? Say there are more stars on one side than the other. This is like a tug of war where one team has more people. In that case, the resistance you feel when you move would be different depending on which direction you move in. Space would be warped. The very physics of an ordinary resting state would begin to work differently. It was precisely this idea that Albert Einstein spent years trying to incorporate into his formulas, and he failed. His calculations only worked perfectly when the universe was perfectly balanced in every direction. The moment he introduced a tilt in mass, the math broke. In the end, he simply left the problem unsolved. And this is where it leads us today. Every satellite trajectory, every engineering blueprint for a rocket, every calculation for space travel, all of it was built on the belief that the universe is perfectly balanced. But since then, we have measured the cosmos and understood there is no balance. Far more matter is concentrated on one side than on all the others, which means absolutely every number we use to launch vehicles into orbit is slightly wrong. How large is this error? We do not yet know. Will this margin be enough to start causing our space missions to fail in large numbers? We will find out soon enough, because it turns out that gravity and physical forces work somewhat differently depending on which direction a rocket is flying. Spacecraft may encounter loads that engineers simply never wrote into their formulas. And this is where old Mach's unresolved puzzle truly makes itself known. The ending of this story will not be written in dull physics textbooks. It will be written on the whole of everything we have ever launched toward the stars. But there is one detail that makes you genuinely uneasy. This cosmic imbalance, which Mach had suspected, was not discovered in some distant and alien galaxy. Scientists found its imprint in the oldest light that exists in nature, in the background radiation that has been traveling toward us since the very beginning of time. And when you look at the map of this ancient light, a very strange picture opens up. The line of this global tilt is not scattered chaotically. It points directly at us. 1 chance in 1,000. That is the probability that the invisible axis, running through the oldest light in the universe, points directly at Earth by chance. Not 1 in 10, not 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. And the most frightening thing about this number is that it is not someone's mathematical theory. These are the cold data of 2 completely independent space missions. First, the WMAP satellite in 2003, and then Planck in 2013. 10 years apart, a different team, instruments 10 times more precise. And both times the instruments show the same thing. The axis exists, and it is pointing straight at us. Physicist Max Tegmark was the first to see this in the WMAP data. He called the finding the Axis of Evil, and not at all for the sake of a dramatic headline. For fundamental physics, this is genuinely evil. A line sewn through the fabric of the universe in a place where it has absolutely no business being. By every law there are, the universe cannot have special places or preferred directions. And yet, it does. When Tegmark published this, the scientific community simply waved it away. Instrument malfunction. But then, the data from the Planck satellite arrived. At that point, dismissing everything as a technical error became impossible. It stopped being skepticism. It became denial of reality. To grasp the scale of the anomaly, imagine this oldest light as a fingerprint left at the moment the universe first became transparent. 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Before the first stars, before planets, before everything. This fingerprint of light is supposed to be chaotic, like white noise on a television screen with no signal. But instead of chaos, we see a clear structure. It has a direction. And all of this most ancient geometry is arranged precisely around the place where we now stand. Around this planet. Which raises a question to which no one in science has an answer. Could the universe have known where Earth would appear, billions of years before it had even formed? Earth is the physical center of a spatial anomaly. Any burst of energy along this line is aimed directly at us, not somewhere toward a neighboring system. Here, 2 satellites, 10 years apart, one frightening conclusion. Everything we have ever built for space was designed for a symmetrical universe. But there is no balance. The basic calculations of gravity contain a fundamental flaw. Navigation in deep space by the old rules loses its meaning. Ships will drift off into the void, missing their targets. You think these are predictions about the distant future? In 1998, NASA raised the alarm. 2 of their spacecraft began inexplicably deviating from their assigned trajectories. Scientists spent 14 long years looking for a glitch in their algorithms. They took the code apart molecule by molecule and found nothing, because there was no error in the calculations. It was the universe itself, into which they had sent those probes, that turned out to be wrong. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11. They were launched in the very early 70s, and they were the most precisely tracked craft in history. But in 1998, physicist John Anderson from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory ran through the telemetry and realized something did not add up. Both probes were decelerating faster than they should have been. Yes, the discrepancy seemed laughable, just tiny fractions of a millimeter per second. But over interplanetary distances, this microscopic figure accumulates and turns into thousands of kilometers of error. The probes were not where they were supposed to be. And this is not a rough estimate. This is a measurable, verifiable fact. NASA spent 14 years on this puzzle. They checked everything. They measured the thermal radiation emitted by the electronics of the probes themselves. They went through the software code line by line. They examined every component. In 2012, physicist Slava Turyshev showed that the pressure of heat from the craft's own systems does indeed explain the majority of this anomaly. The majority, not all of it. The remainder did not go away. It remains unexplained to this day. And this was the best possible scenario. Spacecraft that we understood better than almost anything we had ever built. Every bolt, every circuit, every thermal property had been built into the formulas, and physics surprised us anyway. And here is the real problem. We use this exact same physics to calculate the nuclear reactors here on Earth. We use these same rules to figure out how much radioactive fuel is safe in a particular configuration, how to properly shield particle accelerators, how complex quantum systems interact at scale. If the same kind of pioneer remainder exists in these calculations, if an unexplained fraction is quietly sitting inside the margins that nobody examines too closely, we will not know about it until it is too late. And an emergency at a nuclear reactor is not the same as a course correction in empty space. That is an entirely different conversation with entirely different stakes, which means we are blindly trusting calculations without fully understanding the basic laws of nature. 14 years of work. A partial answer published as a complete solution. And the unexplained remainder quietly archived away. And nobody knows how many more of those remainders are sitting right now in calculations that matter far more than the coordinates of a distant probe. There is no public answer to that question, which is itself an answer. But the pioneer story was only about gravity at large distances. The next question cuts far deeper. What if, out there far from us, it is not only gravity that changes? What if the very numbers that make matter hold together are changing? The fine structure constant. Physicists call it simply alpha. It is the number that determines how strongly charged particles interact with each other, which means it is the one that decides how atoms bond together, how chemical bonds form, how the DNA helix holds its shape, and how nuclear reactions proceed at all. Change this constant even by a fraction of a percent, and the atoms in your body would simply stop being stable. The molecules you are made of exist only because alpha has exactly the value we observe, right now and right here. In 1999, astrophysicist John Webb began studying the light from distant quasars in opposite ends of the sky. The spectra of this light work like fingerprints. Each chemical element absorbs radiation at precisely defined frequencies, and those frequencies are set by the value of alpha. The logic is simple. If the laws of physics are the same everywhere, then the fingerprints should match perfectly. But they did not match. The value of the constant turned out to be slightly higher in one direction, and slightly lower in the opposite direction. The difference was just 100,000th of a fraction, a tiny number, but it was consistently confirmed over 20 years of observations at the most varied points in the universe. And in 2021, the Fermilab laboratory conducted the famous muon experiment, involving the heavy cousins of electrons. The way a muon responds to a magnetic field is predicted by our standard model of physics with flawless precision. But the actual measurement diverged from the theory by 4.2 sigma. To put this in perspective, in physics, 5 sigma is the ironclad threshold for an official discovery. And 4.2 means that something is affecting these particles right now that is not in any of our equations. 2 completely different experiments, 2 different physical phenomena, and both pointing to exactly the same thing. The fundamental laws of chemistry depend on direction in space. If we ever venture beyond our familiar zone, the structure of DNA would simply stop sustaining itself, and nuclear reactions inside engines would begin to proceed according to a completely unpredictable, critical scenario due to a shift in the basic constants. Webb's data say that this change occurs at cosmological distances, billions of light years from us, but here is the catch. We have never measured alpha anywhere other than our solar system. We do not know where the line is. We do not know at exactly what distance this drift in the laws of physics will begin to affect biology, reactors, the stability of matter itself. And do you know which direction this drift runs in Webb's data? It maps perfectly onto that same axis. The invisible line that keeps surfacing in calculations and looking straight at us. Which means we are not sitting safely in the middle of something understood and uniform. We are standing on a boundary. And we have no idea what lies on the other side of it. An invisible boundary. Fundamental constants drifting in one specific direction. Gravity that surprised us on probes we understood down to the last bolt. Each of these oddities, taken alone, could be dismissed as an instrument error. But together, they point to the fact that space itself around us is structured differently than we thought. And in 2021, a team led by astrophysicist Konstantinos Mikas added a finding that is harder to wave away than anything else. They took data from the eROSITA X-ray telescope and checked 38,000 galaxy clusters. These clusters are convenient because they operate by a simple rule. The temperature of the superheated gas inside them is directly connected to how brightly they glow in X-ray. If the cosmos is the same everywhere, this rule should work perfectly in every direction. Mikas's team checked this in all directions, and the rule did not hold. The glow turned out to be slightly stronger in one part of the sky and slightly weaker in another. And this held true across 38,000 objects. That can no longer be attributed to chance. Space is expanding at different rates, which means the properties of the cosmos change depending on which direction you look. And this hits our everyday GPS in a way that takes a moment to fully absorb. How does GPS actually work? It continuously receives precise time signals from satellites. But in orbit, time runs slightly differently than on the ground, so mathematical corrections are built into the system. And all of these calculations rest on one simple belief: space is the same everywhere. But if the cosmos is expanding at different rates in different directions, that means our corrections are wrong. The error seems tiny. But in systems of ultra-precise timekeeping, small errors have a way of accumulating, across millions of computations every second, across years of operation. And these systems are not only used to get directions on a phone. The clocks that run them are what air traffic controllers and airport radar systems depend on. They hold together the synchronization of bank transfers across the globe, and high-precision military targeting systems. Space has different densities, which means navigation, satellite communications, and guidance systems are accumulating systematic errors right now, errors that will inevitably lead to large-scale failures in the most critical technologies. The oldest light in the universe, the breaking of distant probes, the constants on which chemistry depends, the rate at which the cosmos expands, and data from 38,000 galaxies, 5 completely independent measurements, one direction, one enormous axis, and every system we ever built on the assumption of a perfect symmetrical cosmos was built blind. We ignored all 5 facts. For now, these errors are tiny. But in systems that operate without pause, errors do not stay small forever. They accumulate until they cross a critical line. And it is one thing when a car's navigation system crosses that threshold and tells you to turn the wrong way. It is something else entirely when that invisible limit is crossed by a global power grid or the control systems of a nuclear reactor. And this mathematics, written for a cosmos that does not actually exist, has one more problem. A problem that, for some reason, is not usually discussed in connection with the rest. For as long as we have had sensitive instruments, they have been recording the same thing. Our planet is continuously pierced by radiation, coming from one specific point in the sky. It is not ordinary light from a known star, not a stream from any identifiable object. These are particles that, according to all our formulas, simply should not exist with the insane energy at which they arrive. Look, in 1966, 3 physicists, Griesen, Zatsepin, and Kuzmin, independently calculated a hard limit. Protons carrying extremely high energy cannot travel more than 160 million light years without losing it. Along the way, they inevitably collide with the oldest light in the universe, the very light in which scientists found the enormous axis. And that light bleeds off their speed. This was called the GZK limit. And this is not some rough theoretical concept. It is a strict mathematical calculation derived from the very foundations of physics, reached by 3 people in complete independence. In 2008, the Telescope Array System of Telescopes was launched in the state of Utah. By 2014, they had accumulated enough data and published a report. There is a hotspot in the sky, a region near Ursa Major that produces more ultra-high energy particles than any other part of the cosmos. And these particles violate the GZK limit. We looked in that direction. Within 160 million light-years, there is not a single object capable of generating that. After traveling such a distance, these particles should have lost their energy, but they arrive at full power. This leaves one of 2 possibilities. Either the GZK limit is wrong, which means we simply do not understand how particles behave in space, and there is a fundamental hole in our basic calculations, or something is bombarding us from a much closer distance, and we cannot see it at all. Either way, it means one thing. The actual physics around us looks nothing like what is written in the textbooks. The Earth is literally being bombarded by particles of impossible energy, coming from a single point. And this bombardment has consequences. It directly leads to irreversible damage at the cellular level and to the physical burnout of microelectronics. This hotspot has not shifted by a single millimeter in 15 years. The stream does not stop, and it strikes from exactly the same direction as the one the axis points toward. The same direction our galaxy is being pulled toward by an invisible force. This is exactly where all 5 independent anomalies converge, and whatever is out there, it reaches us every second. These particles do not get stuck in the upper layers of the atmosphere, they pass straight through it, which means the first thing standing between us and this source, our only physical shield, is already struggling. In 1995, physicists Gary Glatzmeyer and Paul Roberts created the first computer simulation of Earth's dynamo, that process in the liquid iron core that generates our magnetic field. Their simulation successfully modeled an inversion, the process of the magnetic poles flipping. This sounds like a breakthrough, until you read the fine print. The model was never able to calculate exactly when the next reversal would occur. It only proved that one is technically possible. The difference between these 2 facts is like knowing that a bridge over a chasm will collapse sooner or later, but having absolutely no idea which particular Tuesday it will happen on. Since 2014, satellites from the European Space Agency ESA have been continuously monitoring our field, and it is weakening at a rate of 5% per century. Right now, a vast South Atlantic anomaly yawns above the planet, a massive gap stretching from South America to Africa. The field there is already so weak that instruments aboard satellites fail on every pass through that zone. Not occasionally, on every single pass. The last full pole reversal was 780,000 years ago. The average historical interval is only 200,000 to 300,000 years. We have overrun that deadline by a disturbing margin. And during an inversion, the field does not simply flip at the flick of a switch. First it thins. It breaks apart into dozens of small, chaotic poles. The protection against the solar wind drops to a minimum. And those heavy particles from Ursa Major, which are already penetrating the atmosphere, will begin passing through it on a massive, uncontrolled scale. And this will not last a couple of days. A pole reversal takes thousands of years. In modern science, there is simply no engineering solution for patching a 1,000-year gap in a planetary shield. Earth's magnetic canopy could critically thin at any moment. Without fully understanding the mechanics of Earth's core, we do not know exactly when we will be left alone with the hard radiation of deep space. Glatzmeyer's simulation is now nearly 30 years old, and in all that time, no one has managed to improve its precision enough to close this blind spot. The field continues to weaken. The anomalous particles continue to arrive. We built our entire civilization on the assumption that this shield would always be above our heads. But we have absolutely no plan B for the day it simply stops working. 2 trillion objects on the very edge of our gravitational reach. We have never seen them directly. We know they are there at all only because of the comets that arrive from that zone. And those comets arrive millions of years after something nudged them from their places. In 1950, astronomer Jan Oort mathematically established the existence of this cloud to explain where long-period comets come from. These are icy objects at a distance of 100,000 astronomical units from the Sun. They are held in place by the tidal forces of the galaxy. And the word loosely held is the most important word here. When the gravitational background around our solar system changes, objects in the Oort cloud respond. Not immediately, no. The timescale runs into millions of years. But this response is absolutely physical, and we can measure it. Since 2014, astronomers Scott Shepard and Chad Trujillo have been cataloguing distant objects beyond Neptune's orbit. And the orbits of these bodies keep pointing to an external influence that simply does not fit the standard physical models. Something is pulling at the outer edges of our system. That same imbalance we measured at galactic scales, the dark flow, the pull towards something beyond the horizon of visibility, does not stop at the edge of the solar system. It reaches inside. And it has been reaching inside all along. The comets this flow has already dislodged from their orbits are in transit right now. The travel time from the Oort cloud to the inner planets runs into millions of years, which means the objects that will arrive in the next 1,000 years were pushed in our direction long before humans ever appeared on Earth. And we physically cannot know what is already heading our way. We cannot observe the Oort cloud through telescopes. We only notice these objects when they cross Neptune's orbit. And by that point, their trajectory is already locked in. The gravity of an enormous invisible mass is distorting space. Its tidal forces are destabilizing the Oort cloud, sending millions of comets toward the inner system. Our basic map of the cosmos has turned out to be a forgery. We are incapable of accurately predicting either radiation bursts or the trajectories of threats from deep space. Essentially, we are blind. The Oort cloud is the outer wall of our solar system, and the same forces that are pulling our galaxy into the unknown have been pressing against this wall for the entire time our planet has existed. And the comets they have already squeezed inward. We will not see them until they are on our doorstep. And by that point, the mathematics that we'll need to calculate their trajectories is precisely the same mathematics whose complete inadequacy we have been examining all along. It is already in motion. This is the main problem with systems that run on slightly flawed mathematics. Mathematical errors do not announce themselves. They accumulate in absolute silence until the system suddenly does something that by the formulas should have been impossible. And no one has studied this quiet accumulation of chaos more carefully than astronomer Jacques Laskar of the Paris Observatory. In 1994, Laskar ran 2,500 computer simulations, calculating the future of the solar system across 5 billion years. And he proved that our system is chaotic. Not in the everyday sense, but in the strict mathematical sense. This means that a microscopic change in initial conditions leads over time to completely unpredictable consequences. In roughly 1% of his simulations, the orbit of Mercury became destabilized. It crossed Venus's path. The gravity of Venus, in turn, sent Mars directly across Earth's trajectory. In the most extreme scenarios, our planet simply lost its orbit and flew off into the void. Laskar published these data as an amusing theoretical paradox. A chance of just 1% over 5 billion years. Nothing to worry about, apparently, but here is the catch. All of Laskar's simulations were built on the assumption that the gravitational environment around us is perfectly symmetrical. No external pull, no dark flow, no enormous axis and hidden masses beyond the edge of the visible universe. In other words, they were based on exactly the rules whose complete inadequacy we have been demonstrating throughout all the preceding facts. In chaotic systems, new inputs do not shift the result slightly. they shift it entirely, and that 1% is no longer 1%. Since then, no one has rerun Laskar's simulations with the real, measured gravitational asymmetry of the cosmos factored in, because no one in their right mind wants to see the actual number. Planetary orbits could irreversibly shift, subjecting Earth to colossal gravitational stresses. Laskar proved that the solar system is separated from complete chaos by just one unlucky gravitational push from outside. And since then, we have instrumentally confirmed that push exists. Steady, growing, coming from one consistent direction. And the comets that push has already sent in our direction will arrive into a solar system whose supposed stability was calculated using entirely different, non-functioning rules. We are not standing still. We never were. In 2008, astrophysicist Alexander Kashlinsky was the first to name the precise figure, where we are going and how fast. He was studying the oldest light in the universe and noticed an interesting detail. The superheated gas inside galaxy clusters leaves barely visible imprints on this ancient light. From these imprints, it is possible to precisely calculate the speed of galaxies without even knowing the exact distance to them. Kashlinsky checked 700 galaxy clusters, and all of them were moving in the same direction, at speeds of 600 to 1,000 kilometers per second, above and beyond what could be explained by the ordinary expansion of the cosmos. Something powerful was pulling our entire region of the universe toward a single point. He called this the dark flow, and in 2023, another researcher, Ryan Watkins, extended this check to 56,000 galaxies. And the result? Exactly the same direction, the same anomalous speed. Only the scale of the problem turned out to be twice as large. Back in 2014, scientists mapped the movement of 8,000 galaxies and understood something that turned absolutely everything upside down. Our Milky Way is not simply a spiral drifting alone through the void. It is a microscopic speck of dust inside a colossal network spanning 520 million light-years. This network was named Laniakea, and this entire unimaginable structure is not merely drifting, it is flowing at speeds that, by our earthly standards, would cover the distance to the moon in less than half a second. And it is flowing toward the Shapley supercluster. This is a massive node of tens of thousands of galaxies, so dense that by our old rules of physics, it simply should not exist. It is the most massive object in our part of the cosmos. It would seem this is the end of the chain, the magnet itself. But no, the Shapley supercluster is also moving. Something even more distant is pulling it. Imagine you are standing on a hillside, feeling the ground giving way beneath your feet. You look up and see an enormous boulder dragging you along. And then you look more carefully and realize that the boulder is also sliding upward, towards something massive beyond the ridge that you cannot even see. In 2016, astronomers discovered the Vela supercluster, yet another gigantic structure that had been hiding directly behind the disk of our own galaxy throughout the entire history of science. And it also acts as a magnet. It pulls at us, while itself flying further on. Every time we think we have found the end of this chain, a new link appears. So what lies at the very end? What mass could possibly pull 56,000 galaxies at a speed of 1,000 kilometers per second, continuously throughout the entire history of this sector of the cosmos? Our galaxy is being dragged into the unknown at a colossal speed. The space around us is literally being compressed. And this gravitational tension is not going away. The constantly growing pressure is distorting the very structure of the Milky Way. It is breaking the internal balance and could fatally shift planetary orbits, permanently stripping Earth of the stable conditions we have known. We are charging toward regions of extreme matter density and overwhelming radiation levels. But the most troubling thing of all is the answer to the question of what is pulling us. What the data show is not plotted on any star chart. It is not a known supercluster. This mass sits beyond the edge of the observable universe, beyond the physical limit from which light has even had time to reach us over billions of years. We can measure this gravitational pull with unsettling precision, but we physically cannot see it. All we can do is watch as 56,000 galaxies accelerate and fly into this abyss, and understand that we are one of them. And this thought immediately places us in an even tighter bind. Because if there is something far ahead pulling us with such force, there must also be something behind, something we are running from. But we are not only being pulled, we are also being pushed from behind. In 2017, astrophysicist Yehuda Hoffman mapped the movement of 8,000 galaxies with such extraordinary precision that he was able to see not only where everything is flying to, but where everything is fleeing from. And directly behind us, in the direction opposite to the pull of the giant masses, an absolute void was found. This is a colossal void. A gigantic region of below average density. A region where there is so much less matter compared to the rest of the cosmos that physics literally squeezes everything out of it, including us. Hoffman called this the dipole repeller. We found ourselves caught in a vice, a monstrous mass pulling us from the front, and a colossal void pushing us from behind. Both forces lie along the same invisible axis. Both drive us in the same direction. This is not some distant local anomaly. This is the architecture of the universe itself. The large-scale structure of the cosmos for hundreds of millions of light years around us is arranged such that we simply have no choice. We are not piloting this flight. We are a cork jammed between two of the most powerful ocean currents in existence. And here arises a question that the scientific community does not like to raise too loudly. If we are being pushed from behind and simultaneously pulled forward, what is happening to everything inside our solar system as the pressure from both sides grows? Our thinning magnetic field, the swarm of icy comets in the Oort cloud, that very fragile balance of planetary orbits that Jacques Laskar calculated. All of our models were built on the belief that the gravitational background around us is perfectly static. But it is not static. Space has been compressing around us all along. The problem with this flight is that out where we are being dragged, wherever the end of this chain turns out to be, entirely different rules apply. The physics of extreme mass concentration, a density we have never encountered, gravitational fields that our earthly equations have never been tested against, and a radiation environment our infrastructure simply has no way to protect itself from. And the closer we get to that invisible line beyond the horizon, the more strongly this hostile environment affects us. Not a billion years from now, right now, imperceptibly, but each year slightly more than the year before. Because of this fundamental asymmetry in space, our most advanced theories are already beginning to break down. Quantum mechanics and macroscopic physics are increasingly contradicting each other, which means the creation of future technologies, whether commercial nuclear fusion or stable quantum computers, risks running into an insurmountable wall. We are trying to assemble them by the rules of a symmetrical world, while our universe is warped. Two currents, one direction, no brakes, and the single most important number which should have told us precisely how fast this entire process is unfolding, the one figure on which all of cosmology rests, has suddenly produced two different answers, both mathematically correct, and both simultaneously impossible. Two completely correct answers that simply physically cannot both be correct at the same time. Science called this the Hubble tension, and it is the exact kind of dead end that people do not like to discuss out loud. Nobel laureate Adam Rees measures the rate at which the universe is expanding using stars close to us. His number is 73. At the same time, the Planck satellite draws on data from the oldest light in the universe, the very background radiation in which we found that disturbing axis, and it gets 67. The difference is 9%, and this is not an instrument malfunction. Both measurements are accurate to fractions of a percent. The discrepancy has reached the threshold of 5 sigma. And in physics, 5 sigma is the ironclad status of an official discovery. And do you know what we have officially discovered? We have discovered that the 2 most precise instruments in the history of humanity disagree by an amount that cannot be explained by mathematical error. If Rees is right, the cosmos is expanding far faster than our laws permit. If Planck is right, we are fundamentally miscalculating distances around us. But the data insist. Both are right. Our basic model of the universe is broken at the deepest level. For 5 years, the finest minds on the planet have been wrestling with a single number. There is no solution. But the most terrifying thing in all of this is not the scientific dead end. What is frightening is what this broken number means in practice. It means that absolutely every distance to every star we have ever calculated contains the same systematic error. We simply do not know where things in space actually are. The entire map we are trying to use to understand what is pulling us, what is pushing us from behind, and what awaits us beyond the horizon is drawn with a ruler that gives different centimeters depending on which end you pick it up from. Think about what this means for our safety. Every model of exactly where our dark flow is headed. Every attempt to calculate how much time we have left before a collision with a dense gravitational environment. Every prediction about how the solar system will behave 1,000 years from now. Every single one of these is based on mathematics with an irreducible systematic error that we can see but cannot fix. Every grand plan humanity has for exploring deep space runs into an invisible wall. We are technically locked inside our zone because the basic principles of navigation are broken. That colossal mass beyond the horizon, which is right now pulling 56,000 galaxies toward itself, it lies at a distance we are unable to calculate accurately. With a mass we cannot determine. It is dragging us at a speed our best physics cannot reconcile with itself. Essentially, we are flying in complete blindness, and the universe has no intention of pausing time to wait for us to fix our compass. We are flying blind, and on top of that, inside a giant bubble. The so-called broken Hubble number, where 2 correct answers contradict each other, has one explanation that the scientific world is very reluctant to accept. In 2013, a group of astrophysicists analyzed the distribution of galaxies for 1 billion light-years around us. It turned out we live inside a colossal void. This is a region where there is 20% less matter than the cosmic average, a genuine cosmic bubble, and along its edges lie denser walls, where the amount of matter returns to normal. And this explains everything. Inside such an emptiness, matter always flows outward, toward those dense walls. Everything inside our bubble spreads from the center faster than in the rest of the cosmos, which means if you measure the rate of expansion from inside this void, and we are forced to since this is where we live, you get an inflated number, those 73. This bubble is simply distorting our measuring tape. We were trying to measure the universe while sitting inside an anomalous zone. The size of this void is 2 billion light-years. How could we have failed to notice it all this time? Simply because until 2013, we did not have the data needed to build a 3D map at that scale. We naively assumed we were sitting in a typical, standard piece of the cosmos, but we never were. And here a real threat emerges. We are not sitting anywhere near the center of this bubble. We are displaced toward one of its edges. The gravitational flows around us are operating asymmetrically. The same forces pulling our galaxy away are simultaneously drawing us toward the dense wall of our own bubble. This is not a safe container. This is an unstable environment, compressing and changing right now. The prospect of ending up at the very edge of this structure threatens our solar system with an irreversible displacement into the cold of intergalactic emptiness. And this brings us to a puzzle that may ultimately turn out to be the same problem in a different form. In 1983, physicist Mordechai Milgrom noticed an oddity. Stars on the outer edges of galaxies rotate faster than Newton's laws allow. The standard scientific answer you already know, that is invisible dark matter providing extra gravity. But Milgram proposed an alternative. Newton's laws simply stop working at extremely small accelerations. The deviation is tiny, but it is there. This idea was called MOND, Modified Newtonian Dynamics. The difference between these models is enormous. We have been searching for dark matter for decades now, and our detectors are completely empty, not a single particle. But the MOND theory was tested on 153 galaxies in 2016, and it predicted their rotation better than models using dark matter. Not by a little, radically better. And here is what this threatens. If dark matter does not exist, and gravity simply works differently at gigantic distances, then everything we calculated about the megastructures pulling us is wrong at its root. The Shapley supercluster, Laniakea, the invisible mass beyond the horizon of the universe. We calculated their mass using Newton's earthly formulas. If those formulas do not work there, then the pull could be many times more powerful than we thought, or the source could be far closer. We genuinely do not know. The most frightening version of MOND theory states that at enormous scales, gravity literally begins to leak into additional dimensions. If the laws of attraction start to change, this would lead to the fatal destabilization of planetary orbits. But most importantly, the force pulling our galaxy may not be a physical object at all. It could be gravity itself, behaving in ways we could not have imagined before the new data arrived. Gravity is leaking, and space is bending. In September 2015, the LIGO detector caught a gravitational wave for the first time. A ripple in space-time from the collision of black holes, a billion light-years from us. The signal lasted fractions of a second, and the deformation inside the detector was 1,000th the size of a proton. But we were able to record it. And this changed our understanding of what we are living inside forever. Space is not empty. It is a physical medium. It has structure. It can compress and stretch. It carries waves through itself, just as water carries ripples. And this is not a beautiful metaphor. It is a harsh physical mechanism. Every gravitational wave passing through the solar system right now is simultaneously stretching space in one direction and compressing it in another. We exist inside a medium that is constantly heaving. Since 2015, we have recorded over 90 confirmed deformations of the cosmos in which Earth hangs. And now think back to the mysterious axis of the universe. If space is a medium, and if it is not symmetrical, then waves do not travel through it uniformly. Picture a piece of wood. It has grain. Things move differently along the grain than across it. If our cosmos also has such grain, then absolutely everything traveling through this medium is subject to asymmetric pressure. This applies to light, and to the signals we use for communication in space. If space deforms unevenly, we will face critical distortion of data. Long-range communication will become impossible. Light from stars will deceive telescopes, and space navigation will go completely blind. In 2015, we proved that the cosmos can be physically disturbed, but we still have not grasped what this constant low-frequency hum of gravitational waves, permeating everything around us, actually means. And all of this sounds not in the least bit reassuring. Because beneath the broken equations, the drifting constants, and the anomalous axes lies the deepest layer of reality, the layer that renders every problem on our list a mere technicality, a temporary inconvenience. In 1977, physicists Sidney Coleman and Frank DeLucia asked, what if the vacuum we exist in is not the lowest and most stable energy state? Quantum mechanics permits the existence of metastable vacuums. They can persist for a long time, but it is an illusion of stability. If our cosmos is exactly that kind, then a single random quantum fluctuation anywhere in the universe could give rise to a bubble of true vacuum. A zone with an entirely different physics. A zone where the atoms we know cannot exist by their very nature. This bubble expands at exactly the speed of light. And the light that carries information about this threat travels at that same speed. You will not be able to see it approaching. There will be no sirens, no warning signs. One moment you exist, and the next the boundary of the bubble passes through you, and the physics that made you alive switches off forever. This sounds like a hypothesis? In 2012, the Large Hadron Collider measured the mass of the Higgs boson. Working from this figure, independent groups of physicists calculated the stability of our vacuum. The verdict is unambiguous. Our world is metastable. The probability of spontaneous decay is vanishingly small. But it is not zero. Not at any point in the cosmos. Not at any second. We are still here simply because we have been lucky. But no one offers a guarantee for the next moment. And here is how this strikes at every problem on our list. If space has an axis, if the gravitational medium is behaving anomalously and is warped, then the risk of a bubble like this arising is higher precisely in zones of heightened tension in the fabric of existence. We are at the physical center of the most powerful spatial anomaly, and no one knows how severely this is shaking the stability of the vacuum around us. No one dares to calculate it, and they do not want to calculate it for one simple reason. On the oldest light in the universe, there is already a scar that directly hints that something like this has happened here before. In the direction of the constellation Eridanus, there is an enormous cold spot. The temperature of this region is 70 microkelvin below everything surrounding it. Part of this can be attributed to a void in that area, but a significant portion of this cosmic cold remains completely inexplicable. In 2009, physicists created a mathematical model. What would the collision of our universe with another, neighboring bubble universe look like in the cosmic microwave background? The answer: like a massive circular disk with an anomalously low temperature. A place where the walls of two worlds touched each other. The geometry of this prediction matches the cold spot in the constellation Eridanus with frightening precision. Everything converges on the conclusion that 13.8 billion years ago, at the very beginning of time, another reality slammed into us at enormous speed. We survived. The physics of the neighboring world turned out to be not quite alien enough to bring down our vacuum, or the impact was a glancing blow. But the problem is that we will never be able to confirm this for certain. The scar from the collision is slowly fading over time, and we are anchored to one single vantage point. But if this spot is truly a scar from a collision, then our universe is not alone. We are inside a grand multiverse, where these bubbles are constantly growing and crashing into each other. Their walls race at the speed of light. If the next impact arrives, we will notice it at the exact moment of our instantaneous and total disintegration. This risk has existed since the first second of our world's formation. We do not know how many alien realities lie just beyond the nearest wall. We know only one thing. One of those worlds has already left a deep scar on us, and that scar lies in exactly the direction our invisible axis points toward. Copy from here. We will only be subtracting. But first, we need to finish counting up the enormous fact we already have in our hands. In 2013, astrophysicists analyzed the distribution of the most powerful gamma-ray bursts across the sky and found a structure that, by every law of the standard cosmological model, simply has no right to exist. It is a colossal wall of galaxies and dark matter, 10 billion light-years in length and 7 billion in width. The Hercules-Corona Borealis Great Wall, the single most gigantic object in the observable universe. And here is why it should not exist. Gravity has been sculpting structures since the moment of the Big Bang. That is 13.8 billion years ago. Given the density of matter and the speed at which gravity is capable of pulling objects together, the maximum size of any bound structure in the cosmos is limited to 1.2 billion light-years. This is not a rough estimate. This is a hard physical limit, and the Great Wall is 8 times larger than that limit. For it to have appeared, matter would have had to organize itself faster than gravity allows. Either this structure is older than the universe itself, or our entire large-scale physics is wrong at its root. All three options are mathematically impossible, but the wall hangs right there, above our heads. Now add direction. The Great Wall sits in exactly the sector of sky toward which the dark flow is pulling our galaxy. The same direction the ancient axis points, and the same direction from which the anomalous cosmic rays strike. The very existence of this wall says only one thing. Whatever lies in that direction has had far more time and colossal gravitational force than our models allow for. All observable matter is compressing toward a single point beyond the limit of visibility. This threatens a fatal merger of galaxies, a colossal gravitational crush in which planetary systems would simply lose their integrity. If the largest visible object in the universe is already breaking basic physics, if matter there has clumped into something 8 times larger than the threshold of impossibility, then a terrifying question arises. Into what exactly has matter organized itself beyond the horizon of visibility? There, toward which we are all falling at enormous speed. The data force us to ask this question, and the answer to it may lie in how the expansion of space itself behaves. And this question is directly connected to whether space will manage to finish us off before we reach our destination. That same dark energy that is pushing the universe apart has one critical parameter. It is called W, the dark energy equation of state, the ratio of its pressure to its density. Scientists have still not been able to calculate this letter precisely enough to rule out the most terrifying scenario. If W equals exactly -1, the expansion of the cosmos accelerates but remains under control. But if W is even a fraction less than -1, the expansion goes into absolute runaway. In 2003, physicists calculated the consequences of this runaway. They called it the exponential decay of space. First, the vacuum overcomes gravity, and galaxy clusters fly apart into the darkness. Then it overcomes the force that holds stars inside galaxies. Then the electromagnetic force that holds atoms in molecules. And finally, the nuclear forces. The expansion of space sequentially tears apart every structure in the universe from the largest to the smallest, until the atoms inside your body simply lose the ability to hold themselves together. Their estimate: this will happen somewhere between 20 and 200 billion years from now. But current instruments show that W is now equal to -1.03, with a margin of error of 0.03. The mathematical margin of error is touching the red zone. We physically cannot rule out this scenario. And here is what moves this from distant theory into real alarm. In 2001, the ekpyrotic scenario was proposed. Our universe was not born from a point, but from the collision of 2 parallel dimensions, branes. This collision gave rise to the Big Bang, and this same mathematical model strictly predicts that the dimensions will collide again. The approaching world is not in our space. It is flying toward us through additional dimensions hidden from our eyes. We can neither see it nor measure the distance. The only traces of its approach would be anomalies in gravitational waves and in the cosmic microwave background, exactly where we are now detecting them. 2 endings, both dependent on one parameter we cannot measure precisely. One will slowly dissolve us from the inside, the other will strike without warning from a blind spot. But we know one thing for certain: the physics that determines our fate is the very same physics that is breaking down right now across 6 independent experiments. The constants on which the answer depends are changing depending on direction, and they are changing exactly along that same axis. The axis is looking at us, the constants are drifting. And behind the questions of where we are flying, there hides the deepest mystery that no one has been able to answer for 100 years. Why do these constants have exactly these values in the first place? Who or what calibrated them so that atoms, stars, and biology itself became possible? In 1986, scientists calculated what would happen if the universe's settings were shifted. Increase the fine structure constant by 4%, and stars will not be able to synthesize heavy elements. decrease it by 4%, and chemistry will stop working. Change the balance between electromagnetism and gravity by a factor of 2, and not a single star will live long enough to create planets. The window in which life is possible is microscopically narrow. In 1989, Steven Weinberg mathematically proved the vacuum energy problem. Quantum theory states that the energy of empty space should be 10 to the power of 120 times greater than what we observe. This is not a rounding error. This is a colossal, the largest gap between calculations and reality in the history of humanity. The value we measure, the very value that allows us to exist, is being suppressed by an invisible mechanism to a perfect proportion. We do not have a single theory that explains how this works. We have instruments that say, this is so, and calculations that scream, this cannot be. Fundamental science is running into a dead wall. Research into the architecture of matter risks reaching a dead end, because we are forced to admit we do not physically control the basic laws of nature. In an attempt to explain this, physicists invented string theory, which allows for the existence of an immeasurable number of other universes. Mathematically, this is beautiful, but it is absolutely unverifiable. If the best answer science has to the question, why do we exist, sounds like we were just incredibly lucky, then we have reached a structural limit. That very foundation that is now developing deep cracks in 6 independent dimensions. 6 experiments, 1 direction, and 1 physicist who looked at all of this and proposed a theory that sounds like madness until you check the math. In 2010, Roger Penrose, who received the Nobel Prize, published Conformal Cyclic Cosmology. His idea is rigorous. Our universe is not the first. Before our Big Bang, there was another reality. It went through its own cycle. Stars went out. Black holes consumed galaxies. Everything cooled. And this state of final darkness is geometrically identical to a new Big Bang. The old physics restarts. This theory makes one specific prediction. At the end of the previous universe, supermassive black holes were evaporating, leaving colossal energy releases. These releases should have imprinted themselves on the very first light of our universe in the form of concentric rings of anomalous temperature. And in 2010, Penrose found these rings in the WMAP satellite data. And in 2013, he found them again in the Planck satellite data. The scientific world is still fiercely debating this, but no one has been able to conclusively prove that Penrose is wrong. The rings hang in the data. What does this mean for our list? It means that the axis we see, the dark flow that is dragging us, and all the spatial anomalies may turn out to be a gravitational ghost. The shadow of the geometry of a universe that died 13.8 billion years before our birth. We are flying toward echo signals of a reality that no longer exists. And if a dead cosmos left its imprints inside us, then experiments at the limits of physical capability carry a systemic risk. If space retains within itself the structure of past epochs, then the splitting of particles at ultra-high energies in our colliders could penetrate into regions of space-time carrying these alien imprints. Penrose is not a crazy fantasist. He mathematically proved the nature of black holes. When he says that the scars of a previous universe are written in our sky, he is relying on strict numbers. These rings may simply be noise, or they may turn out to be the most important signal in history. We simply cannot tell them apart, and every new Hadron Collider we build is getting closer and closer to the energies at which this signal was generated. A reasonable question arises. What happens at the boundary between the epochs of the cosmos? What happens at the boundary of time? And what happens at the boundary of human science's capabilities? It turns out these are the same question. We have tracked dozens of anomalies: the axis, the dark flow, the pioneer anomalies, the broken Hubble number, the violation of the GZK limit, vacuum instability. And the way official science responds to this list is more frightening than the anomalies themselves. The response is always the same. We need more data. Let us build a bigger telescope. let us wait for a solution. But the solutions do not come. Every year, the anomalies only become more confirmed. The dark flow was challenged by 3 independent teams, and each one ran into it again. The axis has been hanging without explanation for 20 years. The Hubble expansion is definitively broken. The anomalies do not close, and this has severe practical consequences. If the physics on which engineers design plasma reactors contains the same blind spot as the physics of galaxies, then our engineering safety margins are built on distorted mathematics. This does not mean the reactor will explode tomorrow. It means that any guarantees of its long-term stability are simply an illusion. This applies to quantum computers as well, whose calculations are based on equations that have already produced a fatal failure in the muon experiments. Deep technological stagnation. Science freezes at the edge of its own capabilities, and we risk never obtaining the technologies of the future on the basis of this knowledge. And if I am being honest, I say this not for dramatic effect. The most chilling detail in this investigation is not any single fact. The horror lies in the overall picture. 6 independent measurements, 1 direction, decades without answers, and the institutions that continue to pretend everything is under control. At some point, the question, when will we solve this, yields to the question, what happens if we cannot? What does it mean that the pinnacle of human science keeps running into the same invisible crack over and over again and cannot explain its nature? Because all of us, as a planet, are flying at enormous speed toward whatever lies on the other side of that crack. All of us, right now, whether our physics understands this or not. Whether our physics understands this or not, its laws continue to work. And the principle of Mach, with which we began, has one consequence that science never carried through to the end. We started with a bucket of water and the question of how any movement only makes sense relative to all the rest of the universe. But Mach's principle goes far beyond ordinary inertia. In 1982, physicists Julian Barbour and Bruno Bertotti derived a strict mathematical basis. Not only movement, but absolutely all physical quantities are determined by the full distribution of matter throughout the universe. All matter without exception, including the matter hidden from us beyond the horizon of visibility. And here is what this means in a world where matter, as we now know, is distributed unevenly. If inertia, that is, the resistance of any object to acceleration, is created by the total gravitational background of all the cosmos, then the invisible matter beyond the horizon makes a direct contribution to this. We cannot see it, but it is affecting you right now in exactly the same way as the visible stars. And if the distribution of mass beyond this horizon is warped, if somewhere out there is a gigantic concentration of matter that is dragging us toward it, then the inertial properties of absolutely every object in our universe change slightly, depending on how it is oriented toward this hidden mass. We have never tried to measure this shift, simply because we did not even suppose that it existed. Barbour's mathematics makes a prediction that no one has dared to test yet. If the invisible mass beyond the edge of the universe shifts, if this gigantic source of the dark flow changes its shape and alters the gravitational pressure on our sector, the inertial mass of every object on Earth will change along with it. And if the dark flow is real, if we are right now flying through a changing gravitational landscape, then the mass and physical properties of the entire solar system have been slowly changing all along. Inertia is literally controlled by objects beyond the edge of the universe. A sudden redistribution of masses there, a collapse, a merger, or a shift in the geometry of the source of attraction could instantly increase the weight of every object on our planet. We could face a critical gravitational overload under which familiar structures would simply collapse under their own weight. Nobody has calculated this scenario, because theoretically the effect is considered too tiny for our current instruments. But too small to measure and does not matter are different things. The entire history of anomalies we have traced today proves one thing. Things that seem insignificant have a way of becoming fatal when you're flying straight toward their source. but the phrase, "we are flying toward the source," rests on the belief that we are real observers in real space. And the statistical mechanics of Ludwig Boltzmann give strong reason to doubt this. In the late 19th century, Boltzmann was studying thermodynamics, the law that everything tends toward chaos and decay, and he ran into a paradox he could not get around. In an infinite universe, existing for infinite time, random thermal fluctuations are capable of spontaneously creating absolutely any configuration of matter, including a human brain. A fully formed, conscious brain carrying a set of false memories of a past that never existed. A brain that is aware of itself for 1 second before dissolving back into chaos. They were called Boltzmann brains. And the mathematics literally demands their existence. And this is not merely a philosophical horror story. If the universe is sufficiently enormous, then the number of such random Boltzmann brains exceeds the number of real beings who evolved over billions of years by an infinite factor. In the conditions of an infinite multiverse, the probability that you and I are real, rather than a second-long fluctuation of the vacuum, is mathematically negligible. This is a real crisis in modern cosmology, and the leading physicists acknowledge it as one of the main unresolved problems. The anthropic principle operates here as a trap. Yes, we exist, because the constants of the universe are perfectly suited to us. But if we were real observers, we would be situated in the most ordinary, typical universe, and our warped cosmos with its dark flow, drifting constants, and invisible axis. This is a maximally atypical, strange world. It is a configuration that was either created artificially according to rules we do not understand, or we are precisely those Boltzmann brains whose false memories include a suspiciously well-structured set of physical anomalies. Neither of these options bodes well. We are either an infinitely rare statistical error in the multiverse, or the data we are measuring is recorded in a memory that never existed. But in both scenarios, only one fact remains unchanged. Right now, we are flying somewhere. This is confirmed by 56,000 independent measurements. Whether we are a fluctuation or not, the movement itself is real. The axis has not gone anywhere. The galaxies continue their course, and we are inside a gravitational flow that has a vector. Which means the next question is no longer about us. It is about what lies at the end of this path, and whether we are capable of understanding it. Understanding it, that is what the scientific community has been trying to do for the past 16 years, since the dark flow was discovered. And the way science responds to this challenge is no less frightening than the anomaly itself. Let us look at the facts. In 2008, the dark flow was discovered across 700 galaxies. In 2011, someone claimed an error in the calculations and declared the flow an illusion. In 2015, an independent analysis found the flow again. In 2023, it was confirmed across 56,000 galaxies with unprecedented precision. Result: 3 out of 4 teams confirmed the anomaly. But the scientific world spent 8 long years preferring to believe one erroneous refutation, rather than break the established picture of the world. The same with the Axis of Evil in the cosmic microwave background. Found in 2003, confirmed in 2013, status as of 2024, unexplained anomaly, which papers vaguely describe as a possible equipment error. The Hubble tension, the expansion rate, broke through the 5 sigma threshold of discovery, has been sitting without a solution since 2019. Hundreds of theories, not one works. The anomalous deceleration of the pioneers, partly attributed to hull heating in 2012, and the unexplained remainder was simply swept under the rug, and everyone moved on. I want you to understand me correctly. Physicists are doing brilliant, honest work. What is breaking down is the collective mechanism of science itself. Anomalies that cannot be explained are not resolved, they are managed. They are neatly entered into reference books, measured with slightly more precise telescopes, and left in suspension. The difference between managing and solving is like the difference between simply watching a crack in a wall and actually filling it in. We have been watching fundamental cracks in the laws of physics for decades, and we keep building new and heavier floors on this foundation. And how this superstructure will behave depends on exactly where the crack runs. All the anomalies we have talked about represent a failure in the very metric of space, in how time and distance work at a fundamental level, and absolutely everything in physics rests on this metric. Thermodynamics is one such pillar. The laws that heat flows from hot to cold, and that chaos, entropy, always increases are based on the belief that space is uniform. This rule works perfectly well here on Earth. But we are seeing more and more clearly that at the scales of the universe, space is not the same everywhere. If the cosmos has different properties in different directions, then thermodynamics is also warped. Heat at gigantic scales will flow not only because of differences in temperature, but also because of which way the grain of space itself is directed. The heat death of the universe, the ending toward which everything is supposedly heading, will arrive unevenly. Some zones will burn out faster, and others will hold out much longer. And the regions that will hold out longest are those where the anomalies are strongest. There, where our axis points. Space has a rigid framework, and if we are moving straight toward the point of physical stress in this framework, the basic laws of thermodynamics could locally break down. And this means the irreversible degradation of the chemistry, atmosphere, and entire biosphere of Earth as we know them. Nobody is writing scientific papers about this, because to do so, you would need to cross thermodynamics with the broken metric of space, which we cannot even properly describe. When 6 independent measurements are screaming about a failure, and scientists are not even trying to calculate the consequences of that failure for our planet, this does not mean the consequences are not important. It means the consequences may be so frightening that no one wants to know the truth. No one wants to know the truth also because the most logical explanation for what is happening is simultaneously the most terrifying. The simplest conclusion, which requires the fewest assumptions, states, these are not 6 different anomalies. These are 6 measurements of one single thing. One thing that is breaking the cosmological principle. One force that is dragging 56,000 galaxies behind it. Something that leaves a trace in the form of the axis in the ancient light of the universe. Something that is making the constants of chemistry drift in one direction. To do all of this simultaneously, this object, or this force, must possess a completely unimaginable mass or geometry. And if this really is one force, what we need to understand it is not a patch to old equations. We need a revolution on the scale of quantum mechanics. A complete replacement of all existing physics. What will this replacement look like? We have no idea. Nobody is being falsely modest. We simply do not have a single mathematical model that could unify all 6 anomalies. There are theories about gravity leaking into other dimensions. There are ideas about the imprints of a past, dead universe. There are holographic concepts. But all of this is only theories. In practice, we are in a terrible position. The instruments prove that there is something out there ahead, but we absolutely do not understand what it is, and we are flying straight toward it at full speed, and this is not a figure of speech. This is physical reality. 6 independent measurements, one direction. Our planet is at the epicenter of a large-scale spatial anomaly. Earth is directly subject to forces that are distorting the very structure of the cosmos. There is no way to take shelter on the periphery because we are flying toward the source at a speed of hundreds of kilometers per second. The horizon is closing in. Our atmosphere, magnetic field, and orbital stability all depend on laws that, as we have already proven, are functioning with an error. And if Webb's data are correct, and the laws of physics really do break down as we approach this invisible point, then the most important question stops being rhetorical. What will happen to all of us in the second when the physics that allows us to exist simply switches off? What will happen when the laws themselves change? This is exactly the question we have been building toward all this time. And this is not a philosophical metaphor. This is harsh physics. If we are flying through a universe where the basic constants change depending on direction, and 20 years of telescope data say precisely this, then sooner or later in our trajectory there will come a moment when Earth's values simply stop working. This will not happen in 1 second. It will be gradual, like atmospheric pressure changing as you climb a mountain, with the single difference that this mountain is woven from the laws of physics, and you physically cannot turn around and walk back. Take the fine structure constant, alpha. It determines how tightly electrons are bound to atomic nuclei. A shift of 100,000th, which is exactly what astrophysicists have recorded, seems trivial. Within a single isolated atom, you would not even notice it. But this constant determines the rates of absolutely all chemical reactions. The metabolic processes inside your body were calibrated over 4 billion years of evolution to work perfectly at one single value of alpha. At a different value, they will begin to fail, not catastrophically and not instantly, but the error will begin to accumulate from generation to generation. All the biology inside us rests on numbers that were only stable locally, in our tiny zone. They were never tested under other conditions, and we have no idea what the systemic failure of the human organism looks like at the subatomic level, simply because no one has ever seen it. The same applies to nuclear physics. The force that holds protons and neutrons together depends on the strong nuclear interaction constant. The slightest drift in this number changes the very concept of the stability of matter. Elements we consider safe will suddenly become radioactive, and radioactive isotopes will suddenly stop decaying. That periodic table hanging in every physics classroom, it is not an absolute law of the universe. It is simply a local guidebook. Calibrate to a specific coordinate in the cosmos. In a region where the constants are shifted even slightly, the table will be entirely different, and the basic chemistry of our life will begin to work unpredictably, or will not be able to work at all. The basic properties of chemistry directly depend on our vector in the cosmos. Upon leaving the familiar zone, the structure of DNA will inevitably lose its cohesion, and systems inside nuclear reactors will enter a mode of uncontrolled critical failure simply due to a shift in the basic settings of reality. And the word zone is used here in the most literal sense. The data show that we live inside a kind of bubble with specific parameters. The further you move from it, in the direction the axis points, the more strongly these parameters drift. This zone has a boundary. We do not know where it lies. We do not know how sharp it is. We do not know whether the physics on the other side changes gradually or breaks off in a cascade. We know only one thing. This shift has a vector. And we know for certain that we are flying along this vector. And we understand that the physics on the other side of this invisible line has never been tested for compatibility with the only form of biology that we know how to sustain. The only chemistry we know how to sustain. In this phrase lies the entire scale of our situation. We exist inside a narrow set of physical conditions that we did not choose, cannot change, and until very recently did not even suspect were of a purely local character. We naively believed that the constants of the universe were constant, that the cosmos was uniform, that the physics we discovered here applies absolutely everywhere. 3 fundamental assumptions, and all 3 are right now cracking at the seams. Let us honestly take stock. Here is what we actually know. We know that 6 scientific instruments, independent of each other, relying on different physical phenomena, operated by different teams across different decades, found one and the same gigantic spatial asymmetry pointing in exactly one direction. This is an undeniable scientific fact. The axis in the WMAP cosmic microwave background, the Planck axis, the dark flow of the cosmos, the bulk flow, the anomalous hotspot of cosmic rays, the anisotropy of the eROSITA telescope. The data are on the table. The measurements are absolutely real. The statistical precision is incredible. And here is what we do not know. We do not know who or what is causing this. We do not know whether it is one gigantic force or a chain of 6 connected phenomena. We do not know how far across the universe this tilt extends. We do not know exactly where the boundary of our home zone of physics lies. We do not know whether we will cross this boundary gradually or punch through it at full speed. And we do not know what awaits us on the other side. We know the Earth is hurtling straight toward the source of these anomalies. We have measured this. The speed is real. The movement vector is confirmed by 56,000 measurements. But here is what we do not know about the flight itself. We do not know the distance to the source. Because of the broken Hubble number, all our navigation systems carry a systemic error that we cannot fix until we understand which version of the constant is correct. We do not know how exactly gravity will be distorted as we approach. We do not know whether millions of icy comets from the Oort cloud have already broken loose toward our orbits, or whether this will happen geological epochs from now. We do not know whether the rapid decline of our magnetic shield is connected to this same axis. We simply do not know. We physically cannot see the source of this colossal threat. It is impossible to develop a protection technology against something you do not understand, and it is impossible to calculate exactly which failure in the laws of nature will be the cause of the fatal ending, because the very cause of what is happening is hidden from us forever. And that last sentence is the most important one. Not, we do not yet know. Not, we will find out when we build a better telescope. Hidden forever. The source of this monstrous pool is far beyond the edge of the observable universe. This horizon is physically dictated by the speed of light and the age of existence. This is not an engineering problem. This is the harsh geometry of space-time. The information about what exactly is dragging 56,000 galaxies behind it is physically incapable of reaching us. We are falling at enormous speed towards something that we are guaranteed to never be able to study. And the very question that started all of this, what will happen to us, to the planet, and to the laws of reality when the basic settings of the world switch off, remains open. Not because we searched poorly, but because this is the kind of question to which there simply is no answer from the point in the universe where we now stand. From the point where we stand. This is where we began our journey 37 facts ago. With your hand, which, when it moves, pushes off against the mass of the entire universe. With that very bucket of Mach and the water that understands it is spinning only because the entire rest of the cosmos exists around it, to which it is invisibly connected. And we finish in exactly the same place, but now with a completely different, chilling understanding of what it means to stand here. We are at the very physical epicenter of a spatial anomaly whose existence has been confirmed by 6 independent observatories. We are locked inside a cosmic bubble of atypical density that for decades has been distorting our metric and deceiving our distance measurements. We are flying at a speed of hundreds of kilometers per second toward a source we cannot see and will never see. We are being dragged by an invisible structure hidden beyond the insurmountable limit of observable reality. The magnetic field, the only thing protecting us from radiation coming from that very sector of sky, has overrun its inversion by 500,000 years and is rapidly degrading before our eyes. The icy Oort cloud on the edge of our system has already been subjected to the forces pulling the galaxy, and the consequences of this shift are already in transit, effectively invisible until they are on our doorstep. The fundamental constants of physics, thanks to which atoms are stable, chemistry works, and biology lives, are changing their values depending on direction in the cosmos. And the vector of this drift perfectly coincides with the vector of our flight. And the laws themselves, the very foundations of our world. The cosmological principle, the foundation on which absolutely all science rested, officially failed its stress test in 2021. The Hubble constant, the main number of the universe, diverged from itself by a critical 5 sigma, and has been hanging in a dead end for 5 years. The law of universal gravitation at enormous scales is being torn apart by two competing models. One that completely erases dark matter from the textbooks, and another that states that gravity is simply leaking into parallel dimensions that we cannot reach. The vacuum, the emptiness in which our world hangs, turned out to be metastable. It is held back from decay only by the finest calibration of the Higgs boson, balanced right on the boundary between stability and complete disintegration. And throughout all this time, no one has sat down to calculate what all these facts mean if you gather them together. Apply them to one specific planet, to a planet that is at the center of the anomaly and is falling toward its source without pause. We are at the very epicenter of the distortion. Earth is directly subject to forces that are right now deforming the fabric of the universe. Hiding on the quiet periphery of the galaxy is impossible. The critical gravitational pressure will fall precisely on our coordinates. What will happen to us when the laws of our world stop working? We do not know. And that is the only honest answer that remains to us after 38 facts and every megatelescope aimed into the darkness. The question asked at the very beginning is still open, and it will remain open forever. Not because physicists gave up, but because the source of the approaching shift is hidden behind a horizon that the geometry of this universe has made inaccessible until the end of time. We are a tiny anomaly that arose inside a gigantic anomaly. We run on physics we did not write. We fly through space we do not understand, towards something we will never see. The laws of nature held stable for exactly as long as it took us to realize. They will not hold forever. And perhaps this is the maximum we could ever have counted on. But it turned out to be enough for this fact to be impossible to get out of your head. What exactly will change when the laws of the universe change? Everything will change, or nothing recognizable of that everything will remain. From the point where we will be standing at that moment, the difference will no longer matter. Basic physics by then will simply have stepped over us and moved on.